The Galactic Council Chamber was the largest building ever created by intelligent life. It floated in the empty space between three dying stars, built from materials that had no name in any human language. The walls stretched so far that clouds formed near the ceiling. Thousands of seats rose in circles around a central platform, and in those seats sat beings from every corner of the known universe. The Valkyrie were there, their bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and split it into colors humans could not see. They were old, so old that they remembered when Earth was nothing but hot rock and poison gas. They sat perfectly still, as they always did, their ancient minds moving at speeds that made centuries feel like seconds. The Thrum Collective filled an entire section of the chamber. They were not one being, but millions, connected through invisible threads of thought. When they spoke, 1,000 mouths moved at once, creating sounds that shook the floor and made the air taste like metal. They had not known individual thought for longer than most species had existed. High above everyone else, in seats made of nothing but focused light, the Ascendant of Yith watched without watching. They had given up their bodies so long ago that no one remembered what they had once looked like. Now they existed as pure thought, as patterns of energy that needed no food, no water, no rest. They observed everything and said little. These were the powers of the galaxy. These were the voices that had shaped civilization across 10,000 worlds. And for 6 months, they had been discussing what to do about humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the entrance to the Great Chamber. She was 57 years old. Her hair had more gray than black now, and small lines marked the corners of her eyes. She wore a simple, dark suit with no decorations, no medals, no symbols of rank except for a small earth pin on her collar. Behind her stood four aides, all of them silent, all of them carrying nothing but small computer tablets. The doors before them were 300 meters tall. They had been built for species that made humans look like insects. When they opened, the sound was like thunder rolling across an endless plain. Alina walked forward. Her boots made small clicking sounds against the floor. Those tiny sounds echoed through the massive space like whispers in a cathedral. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception in the chamber turned to watch her. She had listened to the debates for 6 months. She had heard the Valkyrie call humans dangerous and unpredictable. She had heard the Thrum suggest that humanity should be isolated for their own protection. She had heard the Ascendant of Yith question whether humans even qualified as intelligent life, or were simply clever animals that had stumbled upon technology by accident. The speaking crystal waited on the central platform. It was an ancient thing, older than most of the species present. Whoever held it had the right to speak without interruption. It was the most sacred law of the council, enforced for 12,000 years without exception. Elena climbed the steps to the platform. The crystal pulsed with soft blue light as she approached. When she picked it up, she felt its weight in her hand, felt the warmth of it against her palm. Millions of beings had held this crystal before her, kings and queens and presidents of worlds, commanders of fleets that spanned galaxies. Minds so vast they could think thoughts that would take human scientists centuries to understand. Now it belonged to her, for the next 15 minutes at least. Every voice in the galaxy would stay silent while humanity finally spoke. She did not speak. Immediately, the seconds stretched out. 10 seconds? 20? 30. The silence grew uncomfortable. The Thrum began to hum quietly among themselves, confused by the delay. The Valkyrie crystals flickered with what might have been impatience. Even the Ascendant of Yith seemed to focus more intensely. Curious about this strange human behavior, Elena used the time to look around the chamber. She met the gaze of the Valkyrie delegate, an ancient being named Crystalline Voice of Morning. She looked at the Thrum Collective, at the thousands of identical faces all watching her with the same expression. She looked up at the Ascendant of Yith, at the patterns of light that served as their bodies now. Then finally she spoke. Her voice was quiet. Not weak, not uncertain, but quiet in the way that someone speaks when they know they do not need to shout to be heard. I have listened to you discuss my species for 6 months. I have heard us called dangerous. I have heard us called unpredictable. I have heard us called primitive and violent and unstable. She paused, letting the words settle into the vast space around her. You are not wrong. The chamber went completely still. Even the thrums stopped their quiet humming. This was not how new species addressed the council. New species apologized. New species made excuses. New species begged for acceptance and promised to follow the rules. This human had just agreed with every criticism ever made, against her kind. Alina continued walking slowly around the platform, her footsteps the only sound in the entire chamber. You have studied us since we first sent radio signals into space. You have watched our wars. You have documented our weapons. You have counted our dead. She stopped and faced the assembly. What you have not done is ask us about ourselves. You have talked about us. You have debated our future. But until this moment, no one thought to let us speak. She held up the speaking crystal. This crystal means I cannot be interrupted. For 15 minutes, you must listen to me. You must hear what I have to say. A small smile crossed her face. And something in that smile made several delegates feel a strange chill they could not explain. I suggest you pay attention, because what I am about to tell you will change how you see not just humanity, but yourselves as well. The Velcri delegates shifted in their seat. The Thrum collective fell into perfect silence. The Ascended of Yith leaned forward in their seats of light. Ambassador Alina Vasquez took a deep breath. The weight of her entire species rested on her shoulders. 8 billion people on Earth, millions more scattered across the solar system. All of them waiting to see if their representative could convince the galaxy that humanity deserved a place among the stars. She began to speak, and the galaxy began to listen. Alina reached up and touched her collar. Her fingers found a thin silver chain hidden beneath her shirt. She pulled it out slowly, letting the chamber see the small pendant that hung from it. It was a simple thing. A tiny flame made of silver, no bigger than her thumbnail. This belonged to my grandmother, Alina said. Her voice carried through the vast chamber, amplified by technology so advanced it seemed like magic. Her name was Sarah. She was born in a small village in Poland in 1935. When she was 7 years old, soldiers came to her village. They took her family. They put them on trains. They sent them to a place called Auschwitz. The Velcari delegate made a small notation on their recording device. The name meant nothing to them. It was not in their databases. It was too small, too local, too human to have registered on their sensors. Auschwitz was a death camp, Alina continued. The soldiers there killed people, not in battle, not in war. They killed them simply because of who they were, because of their religion, because of their blood. They killed them in gas chambers and burned their bodies in ovens. They killed 6 million people this way. 6 million human beings, murdered for no reason except hate. She let the number hang in the air. 6 million. It was a small number by galactic standards. The Thrum collective contained billions of individual minds. The Velcari had seen stars die with planets full of life. 6 million was barely a rounding error in the mathematics of the universe, but something in the way Alina spoke made the number feel heavier than it should. My grandmother survived, Alina said. She was the only member of her family who did. She was 11 years old when the camps were freed. 11 years old, alone in the world, with nothing but memories of horror and the small flame pendant her mother had hidden in her shoe. Alina tucked the pendant back under her shirt. We call this event the Holocaust. It happened less than 100 years ago. Less than a single lifetime. Some of the survivors still live today. Some of the people who did the killing still live today. She looked directly at the Velcari delegate. This is not ancient history to us. This is something we remember. Velcari's crystal form flickered. They had achieved space travel 60 million years ago. To them, 100 years was nothing. A heartbeat. A single breath in the life of a species. The idea that a civilization could still be processing trauma from such a recent event was deeply strange to them. But the Holocaust was not our worst moment, Alina said. The chamber somehow grew even more quiet. When we were developing global communication, when we were learning to connect every human on Earth through technology, We used that connection to coordinate the killing of 800,000 people in 100 days. She began to walk again, circling the platform slowly. This happened in a country called Rwanda. The killers did not use gas chambers or advanced weapons. They used farming tools, machetes, clubs. They killed their neighbors, their friends, their family members who had married the wrong person. Her voice remained steady, almost conversational, as if she was discussing the weather. 800,000 people. 100 days. That is more than 5,000 people every single hour. The Thrum Collective hummed in low confusion. They could not understand how a species could turn on itself so completely. In the collective, every mind was connected. Conflict was impossible. The very idea of killing a neighbor was like trying to imagine cutting off your own hand. You want to know what makes humanity dangerous? Alina asked. She stopped walking and faced the ascendant of Yith, the beings of pure thought who floated above everyone else. We created the most powerful weapons in our history and immediately used them on our own cities. Twice, she pulled up a holographic display. Images appeared in the air around her. A massive cloud shaped like a mushroom rising above a ruined city. Buildings turned to shadows burned into stone. People reduced to ash in a fraction of a second. These are called nuclear weapons. They release the energy locked inside atoms themselves. A single bomb can destroy an entire city. We developed them during a war, and we used them on cities filled with civilians, women, children, elderly people who had nothing to do with the fighting. Elena's voice hardened slightly. We are the only species in this chamber who has ever detonated atomic fire on our own population centers. Not once, but twice. The images faded. Alina stood alone on the platform, a small human figure surrounded by beings who had lived for millions of years, who had crossed galaxies, who had achieved things humans could barely imagine. You have studied our history, she said. You have cataloged our wars. There are thousands of them. Large wars, small wars, over land and resources and religion and pride. Wars that lasted for centuries and wars that lasted for hours. You have documented our atrocities, our cruelties, our endless capacity for violence against each other. She nodded slowly. And you are afraid? You look at us and you see a species that has spent its entire existence fighting itself. A species that invented new ways to kill almost as fast as we invented new ways to live. A species that carries darkness inside itself, like a second heart. Alina spread her hands wide. You are right to be afraid. Everything you fear about us is true. We are capable of terrible things. We have done terrible things. We'll probably do terrible things again. The chamber waited. Every being present expected her to make excuses now, to explain why these things had happened, to promise that humanity had changed, had evolved, had moved past its violent nature. But Alina just smiled, that small, strange smile again. What you have not yet understood, she said quietly, is that our capacity for darkness is not our weakness. It is the source of our greatest strength. And until you understand that, you will never understand humanity at all. The silence in the chamber had become something solid. It pressed against the walls and filled the empty spaces between the thousands of delegates. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the Thrum Collective, with their millions of connected minds, had fallen into perfect stillness. Alina let the silence hold for a moment longer. Then she spoke again, and her voice had changed. There was an edge to it now, something sharp and bright like sunlight reflecting off a blade. You have studied what we have done to each other, she said. You have made lists of our crimes and calculated the number of our dead. But you have missed something important, something that changes everything. She took a step forward, moving closer to the assembly. You have not studied what we do after? She pulled up another holographic display. This time the images were different. Buildings rising from rubble. People shaking hands across tables covered with documents. Children playing in schoolyards built on ground that had once been battlefields. After the Holocaust, we did not try to forget, did not hide what had happened or pretend it was not real. Alina gestured at the images floating around her. We built museums. We collected stories from survivors. We made sure that every child would learn about what had happened, so that they would never let it happen again. The images shifted. Men and women in suits, signing papers. Flags from dozens of countries hanging in a great hall. We created new laws. International laws that made genocide a crime against all of humanity, not just against the victims. We built organizations dedicated to preventing such horror from ever happening again. We hunted the people who had done these things across the entire planet, not for revenge, not to hurt them, but because we believed that justice mattered, that evil must answer for itself. Elena's voice rose slightly. We made 3 words into a sacred promise. Never again. Not just a hope, not just a wish. A promise that we carved into stone and wrote into law and taught to every generation that came after. The Valkyrie delegates' crystal form pulsed with a color that might have indicated surprise. They'd assumed humanity was too young, too violent, too primitive to understand concepts like justice and prevention. The idea that humans had created systems specifically designed to stop themselves from repeating their worst behaviors was deeply unexpected. In Rwanda, Elena continued, pulling up new images. A courtroom filled with people. Men and women sitting side by side, some crying, some speaking quietly. After 800,000 people died in 100 days, the survivors did something that most species would consider impossible. They chose to forgive. She paused to let that word sink in. Forgive. It was a simple word, but in this context it carried the weight of mountains. They created something called truth and reconciliation. Killers and survivors sat in the same rooms. They spoke to each other. The killers confessed what they had done. The survivors listened. And then, slowly, carefully, painfully, they chose to rebuild together. Lena shook her head slowly. Not because they forgot what had happened. Never because they forgot. But because they understood that the only way forward was through forgiveness, not revenge. The Throom Collective hummed softly. This concept was alien to them in a way that went beyond species differences. In the collective, there was no individual to forgive or be forgiven. There was only the whole, moving as one. The idea of choosing to forgive someone who had killed your family was something they could not truly understand. And the atomic bombs, Elena said. The mushroom clouds appeared again in the holographic display, but this time they were followed by different images. Laboratories, scientists shaking hands, documents covered with signatures and official stamps. We created weapons that could end our entire species. And then we spent the next 80 years figuring out how to not use them. We built agencies to control atomic energy. We signed treaties promising to limit our weapons. Created systems where enemies could talk to each other so that a misunderstanding would not end all life on Earth. Elena turned to face the full assembly. 80 years with weapons that could destroy everything. 80 years of fear and tension and close calls and near misses, and we are still here, still talking, still trying to be better. She pointed at the Valkyrie delegation. Your species achieved greatness by removing aggression from your genetic code. You cut out the parts of yourself that caused conflict. She turned to the Throom. Your species achieved peace by merging into one consciousness. You eliminated the individual so that individuals could no longer fight. She looked up at the Ascendant of Yith. Your species escaped violence by abandoning physical form entirely. It became thought itself, so that no physical body could hurt or be hurt. Elena lowered her arm and stood straight and tall in the center of the platform. Humanity did none of these things. We did not remove our darkness. We did not escape from it. Did not eliminate the parts of ourselves that cause pain. Her voice grew stronger. We learned to live with them. She pressed her hand against her chest. Every human being carries inside them the capacity for terrible evil. Every single one of us. There is no genetic modification that makes us safe. There is no hive mind that controls our thoughts. There is no escape from the flesh that lets us avoid the temptations of violence.
Allies.
Her eyes swept across the chamber. We face our darkness every single day, every single moment, and every single time we choose. Choose whether to give in or to resist, whether to hate or to love, whether to destroy or to build. Elena's voice dropped to almost a whisper, but somehow it still filled the vast chamber. And most of us, most of the time, choose good. Not because we have to, not because we are programmed to, because we decide to. That is what makes humanity strong. We choose our own nature every day with full knowledge of what we could become if we stopped trying. She smiled, and this time the smile was warm, almost gentle. You think our darkness makes us weak. You are wrong. Our darkness is the fire that forges us. It is the weight that makes us strong. It is the enemy we face inside ourselves, and by facing it, we become more than we would ever be without it. The chamber had changed. Alina could feel it in the way the delegates held themselves and the quality of the silence that surrounded her. When she had begun speaking, the silence had been the polite attention of superiors listening to an inferior. Now it was something else. Now it was the silence of beings who had begun to realize they might have made a mistake. Alina decided to push harder. You want to quarantine us, she said, her voice carrying an edge that made several delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. You want to limit our expansion, control our technology, guide our development along paths you consider safe? She laughed, and the sound echoed through the vast space like breaking glass. Do you know what we call that kind of thinking on Earth? She did not wait for anyone to respond. We call it the logic of tyrants. Every dictator in our history has used the same arguments. These people are dangerous. These people are lesser. These people cannot be trusted to make their own choices. They must be controlled for their own good and for the good of everyone else. Alina pointed directly at the Valkyrie delegation. The ancient crystal being flickered with surprise at being addressed so directly. The Valkyrie achieved spaceflight 60 million years ago. 60 million years of traveling between stars. And in all that time, you have expanded to exactly 47 star systems. She tilted her head. 47. In 60 million years, the Valkyrie delegate pulsed with a color that might have been offense. But Alina continued before they could formulate a response. You removed aggression from your species. You engineered peace into your very genes. And in doing so, you removed something else. You removed ambition. You removed curiosity. You removed the drive to push beyond your limits, to reach for things you cannot quite grasp, to risk everything for the chance to discover something new. Lena spread her arms wide. Humanity has been a spacefaring species for less than a century. In that time, we have colonized our moon, established permanent settlements on Mars, and built stations throughout our solar system. We have sent probes to the edges of our star's influence. We have reached farther, faster than any species in the history of this council. She turned to face the Thrum collective. Thousands of identical faces watched her with thousands of identical expressions. The Thrum achieved perfect unity through biological connection. Every mind linked to every other mind. No conflict because no individual. No disagreement because no separate thoughts. Alina walked toward their section of the chamber. When was the last time a Thrum created something alone? When was the last time one of you had a thought that no other Thrum had ever had? The collective hummed in confusion. The question did not make sense to them. Individual creation was not a concept they understood. Everything was created by the whole. Everything was shared by the whole. The idea of a single mind producing something unique was strange and slightly disturbing. Humans create things alone all the time, Alina said. We write books that no one else could write. We paint pictures that no one else could imagine. We compose music that comes from somewhere deep inside a single human heart. Her voice softened slightly. We fall in love with specific individuals, not with groups. We form bonds so strong that we would die for a single person, not because it benefits the whole, but because that one person matters more to us than our own survival. She looked up at the Ascended of Yith, floating in their seats of pure light. You transcended physical form. You escaped the limitations of flesh and blood and became beings of pure thought. You can contemplate ideas that would take human philosophers centuries to understand. You can process information faster than any computer we have ever built. Alina climbed a few steps toward them, bringing herself closer to their elevated position. But you have never tasted food. You have never felt sunshine on your skin. You have never held a child in your arms and felt their warmth against your chest. You have never danced at a celebration until your legs ached and your heart soared with joy. The Ascended flickered with something that might have been uncertainty. They had not expected this line of criticism. They had considered their transcendence a pure advancement, an evolution beyond the crude limitations of physical existence. "You gave up pleasure to escape pain," Elena said. "You gave up love to escape loss. You gave up life to escape death." She shook her head slowly. "We call that a bad trade." She returned to the center of the platform and faced the full assembly. Every species in this chamber achieved peace by giving something up. The Velkari gave up drive. The Thrum gave up individuality. The Yith gave up feeling. Lena pressed her hand against her chest again. Humans gave up nothing. We kept everything. The good and the bad. The light and the dark. The capacity for love and the capacity for hate. And we learned to carry all of it. Her voice rose. "You think that makes us primitive? You think we are simply too young, too immature, to have evolved past our violence? But you are wrong. We are not on a path toward becoming you. We are something entirely different. We are a species that lives with its demons instead of cutting them out." She pointed at the delegates around her. "You achieved safety by becoming less than you were. We achieved strength by remaining whole. And when the next great challenge comes, when something appears that threatens not just humanity but all of you, who do you think will be better prepared to face it?" Alina smiled that sharp, dangerous smile. "The species that eliminated its ability to fight? The species that cannot think as individuals? The species that no longer has bodies to put at risk?" She shook her head. "Or the species that has spent its entire existence learning to struggle, to adapt, to overcome, to never, ever give up?" The chamber remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was the silence of beings who were beginning to understand that they might have underestimated humanity in ways they had never imagined. Alina was not finished yet. She had one more point to make, and it would change everything. Ambassador Alina Vasquez stood at the center of the platform. The speaking crystal in her hand pulsed with soft blue light, the same light it had carried for 12,000 years. Around her, the greatest powers in the galaxy sat in stunned silence. She had been allotted 15 minutes. She had been speaking for nearly 40. No one had interrupted. No one had objected. No one had invoked the ancient rules to silence her. "You've spent 6 months debating what to do with humanity," Elena said. Her voice had changed again. The sharp edge was gone. The anger was gone. What remained was something quieter, but somehow more powerful. "Allow me to offer a different perspective." She walked to the edge of the platform, bringing herself as close to the assembly as the architecture would allow. "We did not come to the stars seeking your permission. We did not develop the technology to travel between worlds because we hoped you would approve. We did not reach out to this council because we need your protection or your guidance or your approval." The Velkari delegate's crystal form flickered rapidly. This was not how new species spoke to the council. There were protocols. There were traditions. There was a proper humility that younger species were expected to show. "We came because we hoped to find what we have always hoped to find," Elena continued. "Others who might understand us. Others who might see the universe the way we see it. Friends, partners, perhaps even family." Her voice softened. "Humans are social creatures. We do not like being alone. Even when we fight each other, even when we hurt each other, we always come back together. Because being connected to others is more important to us than being safe from them." She paused and looked around the chamber. Thousands of different life forms watched her. Crystals and hive minds, and beings of pure energy. Creatures that breathed ammonia, and creatures that lived in the hearts of stars. More diversity than any human had ever seen gathered in one place. "We looked up at the stars for thousands of years and dreamed of meeting you. We wrote stories about you. We imagined what you might be like. Some of those stories were hopeful. Some were frightening. But in all of them, we wanted to connect. We wanted to know that we were not alone in the darkness." Alina smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile, warm and almost vulnerable. "That is why we came. Not for power. Not for territory. Not for resources. We came because we hoped the galaxy might be full of beings we could love." Then her smile faded, and her voice hardened again. "But make no mistake, we will not be quarantined. We will not be guided. We will not surrender our nature because it makes you uncomfortable. We will not cut out our aggression or merge into a collective or abandon our bodies to satisfy your fears. She held up the speaking crystal. We are human. We carry within us the capacity for every horror and every miracle our species has ever produced. The people who built the death camps came from the same species as the people who liberated them. The people who dropped the atomic bombs came from the same species as the people who created treaties to limit them. We are capable of tremendous evil and tremendous good, and we will not apologize for being whole. The chamber remained frozen as she continued. You can work with us, or you can work against us. That is your choice. But let me tell you what each choice means. Elena pointed toward the assembly. If you choose partnership, you will find no more loyal allies in this galaxy. When you are threatened, we will stand beside you with the same fury we have used against each other for 10,000 years. When you face problems you cannot solve, we will throw ourselves at those problems until we break through or break ourselves trying. Her voice rose. We will bring you innovation because we have never stopped trying to be more than we are. We will bring you art because we cannot help but create beauty even in the darkest times. We will bring you passion because we feel everything with an intensity that most species have engineered away. Then her voice dropped, becoming almost soft. And yes, we will bring you chaos. We will argue with you. We will disagree with you. We will push boundaries you did not know existed. We will ask questions you do not want to answer. We will challenge your assumptions and question your traditions and generally make yourselves difficult. She smiled slightly. But you will never be bored, and you will never doubt that we are fully, completely, intensely alive. Lena paused. The entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. But if you choose to move against us, she said, and something in her voice made ancient beings from deathless species feel a chill they could not explain. If you try to quarantine us, to control us, to limit what we can become... She stood straight and tall, a small human figure surrounded by giants. Remember that everything we have done to each other, every war, every atrocity, every terrible moment in our history, we did while we were trapped on a single fragile world. We did it with weapons we had built ourselves. With resources we had gathered ourselves, with nothing but our own determination and creativity. Her eyes swept across the chamber. Imagine what we will do to protect our world now that we have reached the stars. Imagine what we are capable of when we fight for something we love, instead of fighting each other. Imagine what happens when all of humanity's fury and passion and endless stubborn refusal to give up is pointed at a common enemy. Elena lowered her voice to barely more than a whisper. The Valkyrie have existed for 60 million years. The Thrum have been a collective for longer than Earth has had life. The Ascended of Yith have contemplated the universe since before my species existed. She smiled that dangerous smile one last time. Humanity has been among the stars for less than a century, and you are already afraid of us. Ask yourself why. Then ask yourself what we will become in 1,000 years. In 1,000,000, in 60 million. She stepped back from the edge of the platform and held up the speaking crystal one final time. We are humanity. We have spoken. You may respond when you are ready. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked down from the platform. Her footsteps echoed through the silent chamber. She returned to her delegation's modest seats at the back of the assembly, sat down and folded her hands in her lap. Behind her, the Galactic Council sat in complete stillness. No one reached for the speaking crystal. No one moved to respond. No one seemed to know what to say. The silence stretched for a full 10 minutes. Then 20. Then 30. Finally, slowly, the Valkyrie delegate's crystal form began to shimmer with a color that none of the translators could quite identify. It might have been fear. It might have been anger. It might have been respect, or it might have been all three at once. The ancient keeper of council protocols. A being so old that no one remembered what species they had once belonged to, quietly noted something in the official record. Humanity's delegation had been allotted 15 minutes to speak. They had taken 40-7. No one had dared to interrupt. And somewhere in the back of the vast chamber, Ambassador Elena Vasquez allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She touched the silver flame pendant at her collar, thought of her grandmother, and waited to see what the galaxy would decide. Whatever happened next, humanity had finally been heard.